Can you spare a few minutes for your planet? An important study has been done that pertains to the future of our planet. I'm going to give you 10 points and some diagrams from that study, and I'll try to get it all done within 3 minutes and some change. I'll have to talk fast. Let's go. The study I'm talking about is the AR6 Synthesis Report on Climate Change 2023. There's the cover. The study was commissioned by the United Nations, representing all 195 countries of our planet. It was performed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, involving hundreds of top-notch scientists summarizing the climate change literature and representing the consensus view on climate change. I'll put a link to this report below the video. The currently observed global warming has changed the world's climate and effects, and it's happening quickly. Since the 1980s, each decade has been warmer than the previous one, and the last 8 years have been the warmest on record. Here's a look at the global surface temperature and how it's been increasing rapidly since the 1950s. We're seeing a hotter planet with temperature and precipitation extremes and more violent storms. We're seeing melting ice caps and glaciers, sea level rise, droughts, floods, and forest fires. And we're seeing all of these things at unprecedented rates, extreme and fast. It's challenging our crops, economies, and health, even our survival in places. The currently observed global warming is caused by human activities, notably greenhouse gases from burning fossil fuels. Let's think about causes of past global warming. Changes in the Earth's orbit, wandering continents, or mountain building are all too slow to account for what's happening. Changes in ocean currents that we're seeing are cyclic and not trending. Solar or volcanic activity is not strong enough or trending enough to account for what's happening. Changes in greenhouse gases, yes, that's what scientists have been warning us about for decades. Producing extra greenhouse gases is like wrapping a warm blanket around the planet. Here's a quick look at 3 greenhouse gases that are rapidly increasing, especially CO2. Notice how the increase in greenhouse gases matches the increase in global temperature. Notice how CO2 emissions coming from fossil fuels and industry are much more significant than those coming from farming and forestry or from non-CO2 emissions. Impacts are widespread, severe, and will become more severe with further warming. I'm using forest fires as a background because Canadian forests are burning up this spring in an unprecedented way, and that is what is predicted for other forests that are becoming hotter and drier. Global emissions of greenhouse gases are projected to heat the planet by 1.5 degrees by 2040. That sounds kind of pleasant. And the number 1.5 degrees sounds insignificant, but there are consequences. We are now 1.1 degrees warmer than the pre-industrial temperature, and climate is becoming challenging to us in the ways I mentioned earlier. 1.5 degrees would be more challenging, but doable. But the temperatures beyond that would be increasingly punishing. We must transition away from relying on fossil fuels as soon as possible. Why? Because that's where most of the CO2 is coming from, and because we have alternatives to fossil fuel. We should strive for a carbon-neutral, climate-resilient future. Why? Because we don't want the world to heat up to more than 1.5 degrees and become increasingly expensive and punishing to our systems. We're always going to be releasing some carbon, so we'll have to find ways to remove some, which we can do by storing some in various kinds of plants, or injecting it into the ground, or into the ocean, or back into the soil by modifying our farming techniques. We must invest the effort, ingenuity, and money in mitigating, in other words, making less, our current climate change problems. So, for example, many of our large cities are built on the coastline, and we're not going to be able to move them away from sea level rise. However, we can make the problems less by putting less carbon in the air and by using engineering principles, dikes, and dams to help keep water out of the cities. In terms of planning for and adapting to future climate change problems, we would be wise to not build in flood-prone areas anymore. Some people are going to argue that it's going to cost money to make these kinds of changes, but an ounce of prevention is always cheaper than a pound of cure. We should work with and not against nature in solving these problems. An Arctic fox solves its energy problems with the excellent insulation of its fur. Excellent insulation would go a long way towards helping us solve our major energy costs of heating and cooling. When we do need energy, we should develop natural sources such as solar, wind, wave, microhydro, and geothermal, and we should consider the energy of molecules such as hydrogen and atoms such as uranium. More on that in another video. We must cooperate as a global community to solve our climate change problems. These are problems affecting the whole world, and no one country acting alone can solve them. Well, that's the end of my ultra short video. If you enjoyed it, please like it, subscribe, and come back for more. I'll put some interesting links below this video. If you're interested in environmental science, I have a highly rated course at Udemy called Everyone's World: What You Need to Know About Your Environment. The link is in the description below. See you next video.